on this episode of AK Podcast.
Especially a high producing dairy cow, those ones in your high groups that could be milking 150 to 200 pounds, they're eating anywhere between 70 and 80 pounds of dry matter intake and milking that much. That is a high performance athlete every day doing it. And I'd probably put them right on that scale with maybe what you'd think like the best power lifters in the world.
You know you're a hay nerd when you walk into a hay barn and you just love that smell.
Doggone it, I got to put more corn in. I'm going to have to add some soybean meal. Wow, did that cost you a lot of money?
Put yourself in a crowded elevator and the elevator stops because, I don't know, the building's on fire.
I really like to ask them what's important to them.
We're here for the cow. She's giving us all the profits we need to maintain these facilities and buildings and employees. Man, let's take care of her.
Roadway, I'd call it more as a roundabout. And it's kind of like a weird analogy where we're, as farmers, farming and raising these livestock up, and then themselves are kind of have their own, herd of microbes in their gut that they're raising up.
I have two great passions in my life. The one is people, and the second is cows. And I want to get the best out of them.
Hello, and welcome to AK Podcast, where we explore science and nutrition behind livestock care and management with the best and the brightest in the business. I'm your host, Chris Radke, part of the sales department here at Agri-King. And with me today is the director of field services and a member of the sales management team, Mr. Mike Donaldson. Hey, Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Outstanding, Chris. How's everything in your world going?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a summerish. So, Mike, who we have with us and what do we talk about today?
Well, we don't usually want to put a timestamp on these because a lot of what we talk about is either constant in nature or not really driven by the time of year. But today's topic is driven by the time of year. As we record this, it's the last half of June, summer of 2026, and we've already had instances where we've got extreme heat conditions playing havoc with dairies across the United States. If we really had a lot of pull, we could try and do something about the temperature in general, and we can't do that. So we're left trying to take care of the things that we can do something about. In a previous episode with Dr. Marcus Curley, we talked a little bit about some of the findings now related to what stress and therefore heat stress do, even from a multi-generational standpoint. In that talk, we touched on some of the general management things that people can do to try and combat heat stress. Today, we're going to go a little bit more on the nutrition side of that question and actually talk up one of Agri-King's products that is making a big difference on farms. So we're joined today by Dr. Mat Faulkner. Dr. Faulkner is a nutritionist with Agri-King. He feeds cows in both the Midwest and California. I am going to let him give you as much of a introduction to himself as he chooses to. So, Matt, you're up.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you for the introduction. And Mike, I'm only going to correct one thing here. Yes, I do have a PhD, but please drop the doctor thing. I worked under Dr. Bill Weiss, and I'll never forget before I was a PhD graduate, he told me that his name was Bill. And if a man of that stature and astuteness in the dairy industry can be referred to as Bill, I prefer to be Matt. Very simple. I'm a pretty simple guy, so I appreciate it, but please, Matt is better. So I grew up in the dairy industry my whole entire life. My parents farmed in the late 80s, early 90s, and and unfortunate times and the bad inflation times led to their departure from the dairy industry. But I was very fortunate to have a brother who's 7 years older than I that took over, and he started working for a gentleman, took me along for the ride because I was a kid with nothing to do. And so I worked with him my whole entire life, and thankfully he bought a dairy in 2009. My wife and my kids and I still own a lot of dairy animals with him, do a lot of showing for fun. In the midst of that, I realized that I was a pretty simple kid and I didn't own anything but sweat equity. I took a little time. I went to school for a bit and I took about 4 years off to do some military service. And I came back and I realized when you treat school like it's a job, it's not really that difficult. I had some great professors along the way that spotted talent that I didn't know was there. Dr. Paul Walker at Illinois State, when I came back to school after the military, identified me as a student he wanted to work with. So I finished my bachelor's and I did a master's with him in ruminant nutrition. And then I was afforded the opportunity to work with Dr. Bill Weiss at the Ohio State University. I guess we're supposed to call it the Ohio State University, where I did a PhD in dairy nutrition, specifying in vitamins and trace minerals, primarily trace minerals. I've been doing nutrition work for a little over 10 years now. I've been with Agri-King for about 14 months. Very fortunate. I've had a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great experiences, both with people and producers. I feed dairy cattle across the Midwest in Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa. I fed cattle in Texas, and I currently feed cattle in California as well. I work with about 30,000 lactating dairy animals right now. And yeah, just grinding and trying to make it work.
But you bring up an interesting point, and I have always wanted to make the observation, from Pennsylvania, live in Michigan, the expanded Big Ten universe my whole life, basically, and at the degree to which the Ohio State University, the gets landed on so hard, I really wonder at times if there is an Ohio State University somewhere. That somewhere you're far enough away. I could pose that and not have you at my door in 2 hours beating the hell out of me. So before we get into anything real specific, and some of this might be old news for people, but could you give us a little bit of the background as to why otherwise, it's 75, it's 80 degrees. It's summer. That's what I was looking for. This is beautiful. And yet I've got a whole herd of Holsteins that are already starting to suffer. So what is the dynamic that is, what is heat stress in dairy cattle really? When does it start to be a problem? How's it impacting them?
Well, so, it's a unique thing. And we actually here in the Midwest just went through our first bout of heat stress last week, actually. So a lot of people think that okay, it's pretty comfortable, it's 70 degrees, life is great, but actually cows really go through heat stress. It can be as low as 64 degrees Fahrenheit. You read through all these extension articles and they talk about thermal heat index. So that not only factors in the temperature, it factors in the humidity, it factors in radiation and metabolics. And I'd like you to think of a cow, especially a high producing dairy cow, those ones in your high groups that could be milking 150 to 200 pounds. They're eating anywhere between 70 and 80 pounds of dry matter intake and milking that much. That is a high performance athlete every day doing it. And I'd probably put them right on that scale with maybe what you'd think the best power lifters in the world are, because they're doing it twice a day, 3 times a day. And so I say power lifters more because they're pretty in tune for a heart attack when you're trying to eat all those calories and pump that much iron every day, all day. So, even when we think it's beautiful out, those cows with the heat that they're radiating from their metabolic energy is on top of that. And plus you factor in the humidity, and and then they say radiation too, which is where that thermal heat index comes into. So this is why it can kick in as low as 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of these dairies you go to, you talk about when sprinklers kick on, you talk about when fans kick on. These fans are kicking on between 64 and 68 degrees. And that thermal neutral zone of a dairy animal is why that is. So, and then you also have to think about it. I also try to keep things as simple as possible because I just don't know any better. So when animals are going through a heat stress event, I like to think of them as a fresh cow, right? That fresh cow is going from making 0 pounds a day to producing minimal amounts of colostrum, or, just what you need for colostrum in the first couple of days. But within 14 days, they could be milking anywhere from a young 2-year-old, 60 to 80 pounds, a mature cow, 80 to 120 pounds, and they're eating, 48 to 54 pounds of dry matter intake. They're in a negative energy balance. They're, excuse me, starting to mobilize body, fat, and tissues to support that because they cannot support that from just what they're eating. So when you get an animal in negative energy balance, that animal is starting to mobilize tissue and starting to oxidize different things. And then you introduce oxidative stress. So that's where I think that that cow that is now under heat stress, she's also going through metabolic oxidative stress because she's not eating as much as she's trying to produce, especially in the early onset of heat stress. Because a cow for a day or two of high temperatures, they can handle it. But by day 2.5 and 3, they're starting to reduce the amount of dry matter intake that they think, and it's probably a biological mechanism because the less that I eat, that's the less metabolic energy that I'm exerting and trying to digest that fiber and that starch and different things. So like it's almost like a biological savior, but she's still trying to ramp herself up. So you're introducing not only I have oxidative stress because now I'm mobilizing body tissues to support the production I'm trying to make or the other things that I'm trying to do. But we have the stress of these animals standing longer on their feet. And I mean, when you see heat stress, and I saw it last week, all these people that have cow manager SCR, the most indicative thing, like when you're looking at that, is the activity on those animals goes straight up and the eating and rumination time starts to go down. And the reason that is because they're just standing under the sprinklers or by the fans or whatever you have for any like adaptive heat stress for them. They're just standing there stressed. So, it's a really interesting thing what's going on with the animal, not only from the standing stress, from the lower dry matter intake to the mobilizing the tissue to just trying to survive. And when an animal goes in survival mode, the first thing that goes is your reproduction, right? If I'm trying to survive, I can't support anything else. And then the next thing that goes is your production. And again, for 24 to 48 hours, an animal can survive that or they can maintain that same amount of production. But then when things start to give, you get into that 72 hours and plus, you're going to start seeing that reduction, especially in production, which is what most people notice first, dry matter intake, and then your reproduction performance for the next probably 30 days is going to struggle because those oocytes that were made during that time of heat aren't going to be that strong as well.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I mean, I'm really pleased that we have a decent listening audience, but I don't think that many non-farmers tune in. What you just outlined, Matt, is a perfect example. In modern animal agriculture, we do not push animals. We're not trying to get them to do something. We're trying to remove stress. We're trying to make their life easier. And somewhere along the line, the general public started to view producers, nutritionists, vets as people that are cruelly making animals do things when we're just trying to help them take care of themselves.
We've had such an advancement in the genetic potential of these animals. I mean, you just look where, even component production for the Holstein animal was years ago. Everybody thought the colored breeds, because of their performance on CFP was so great. Anymore, these Holsteins are matching it. And I'm not using that as a comparison among breeds. I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do, but just the genetic potential amongst all of these breeds. We keep pushing these animals further and further, and not because like we are pushing them. It's because the animals genetics have been better to push them, and farmers have just gotten better about making more quality forages as well, to allowing them to reach the potential that those animals genetically have.
Before we get to the Agri-King specific topic that we do want to touch on, what are a few of your kind of go-to boy, it's going to, it's late May. We're going to get into hot weather. What are some things you like to do in a ration, or maybe even from a management standpoint, ahead of the summer heat actually hitting?
So, there's a lot of different tactics, and I've heard and I've read a lot of different things. Like, obviously, especially when we're going through heat stress events, that the animal is going to have reduced dry matter intake. We know that is coming. So a lot of people are like, well, we need to reduce starch in the ration, or we need to reduce that, or we need to reduce this. Well, I sometimes don't always agree with that. Like, if you're really trying to push cows, or you just have a low forage ration, like maybe that's the case. You need to bring that starch and that protein down. But really, you need to make every bite that that animal is going to take the best for that animal, right? So whether, like that's a reduction in fiber, because actually fermenting fiber is more energetically inefficient to that animal than it's going to be to digest starch, but you don't want to get on that acidosis train. So it really becomes that balance of making sure that I have enough digestible forage, highly digestible forage, maintaining my NDF, and still trying to maximize every bit of energy, whether that's increasing dietary fat. And I don't mean fat from corn oil or soybean oil that's going to be a highly unsaturated fat that's going to crash our butter fat. But I mean, and honestly, in current times, it's pretty rough because if you start looking at the Q3 bypass fat market and you start talking $1,800 to $2,200 a ton for fat, it's not like I can just bring in a Palmet 80 or an energy booster and think that that's going to be good. So sometimes it's trying to like convince your producer, and great producers always know, like, I'll spend a little bit of money up front, and maybe we do need to increase that dietary fat because it's going to help with my reproduction. It's going to help with my production, and it's going to be better for the cow and the long term investment. But it's economically inefficient. So I always try to condense the diet, make it as healthy as possible. I try to maximize some of those good quality forages that we have. If I've got maybe some lower digestibility forages in there, say maybe just some straw or some dry hay that I'm using to keep that good rumen mat, I'll cut those back and maybe add a little bit of corn silage in its place, and just try to keep that animal ruminating, trying to make every bit of that bite energetically and efficient. And then part of this on the backside of that is when they're going through oxidative stress, we know that they're going to be immune compromised. Also, when they're standing that much more and the sprinklers are running and they're standing in water because those sprinklers are running down the cow alleys, laminitis becomes a thing. So you do have to watch that starch for that. But, something like biotin, making sure that I've got, 20 milligrams of biotin in there to maintain that hoof health and the keratinization, making sure that my selenium, my vitamin E, and everything are maximized so I can help with that antioxidant stress and like the glutathione peroxidase and everything. Just trying to make that animal as efficient as possible in those times.
That's perfect. That's very helpful. One of the reasons I wanted to have Matt on the podcast today, he mentioned he came to Agri-King about 14 months ago, already a very accomplished, very respected nutritionist across the country. And since he came to Agri-King, he's picked up a tool or two that are unique to us, one of those being a product we call Agri-King Bovine Replete. And he kind of dipped his toe in the water a little last year, saw some very good results. I don't want to turn this into a shameless advertisement, but could you give us a little bit of background as to your experiences with the product and what you continue to see with it, please?
Yeah, so we know when animals go through heat stress. I don't care if it's in the Midwest or if it's in the West Coast. Like when heat hits, you are going to have milk dips. There's going to be milk depression, dry matter intake repression. It doesn't matter. Like it's going to happen. But so I'm very fortunate that Agri-King, to like when they have new customers come on, and new employees come on, for a 30 to 60 day window, Replete is a product that you can test. And again, I'm not a product salesman, never have been. I built my career on not being one. However, when a product fits and it's advantageous and makes a monetary return to the producers, how can't you go wrong? So I was very fortunate. I came on, I believe, in April of 25. I asked, "Hey, can I push this off until summertime?" And everybody agreed. So I started my producers on some 60-day trials. I said, like, I want to know if these products work. And what I saw on the producers that joined onto this program were that early on, milk dips were about the same, right? Like, 4 pounds in that first heat index, blah, 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 whatever. But like cows were recovering 24 to 48 hours, if not 72 to 96 quicker when we were feeding this replete. And I had seen the formula. I kind of knew the basis from it. We have some antioxidants that are proprietary to the company. But there's a little additional vitamin E. There's a little bit additional selenium, some of those other antioxidant cofactors in those enzymes that I was talking about. And I just kind of realized that, like, okay, well, the heat's going to hit and we're going to struggle. But if I can get those cows back quicker, if I can get them ruminating quicker, dry matter intake picked up quicker, milk response back quicker, like that is a huge benefit. But like what I really saw is when we did it in some heifers and even some of the cows, and we didn't do any trials comparison side by side. But historically, when I looked at reproduction amongst heifers and cows on a lot of my dairies, we had anywhere from a 2 to 6% increase in preg rate. And so this just told me, like, okay, we're recovering quicker, we're getting over these heat events quicker, and we're maintaining our reproduction better than we have in the past. Granted, after that heat comes through 3 weeks later, that herd check's not going to be nearly as good. But what I started seeing was instead of 22 to 26%, we were now running 28 to 32, you know, and not maybe the 38 to 42 we were running before. And that's a really big deal coming in to keep your days in milk down. You don't have those big slugs where all of a sudden 3 months you go from my herd was 160 days in milk to now we're 180 days in milk or plus, depending on where you started. Because that can mean, in 9 months, that can mean the difference in 5 to 10 pounds of production. And it's not only the production side, it's the health of the animal. The animal is recovering quicker. The animal is performing better. So you know that you're doing a better job by the animal. And again, we just went through our first heat stress event here, like I said, a week ago. And I pretty much have all my herds on replete. I had one that was not. And all of those herds, it was about a 48-hour, like, my milk was down on, I think it was Wednesday. Wednesday was like when the milk went down. Thursday it was maintained to where it was on Wednesday and started to cool off. By Friday we were building, and by Saturday we were back. So to me, heat's always going to hurt cows. When you have sustained heat for especially 72 hours plus, you're going to have a dip. But like, how quick can I get them back to normal? And that's what I've seen with the Replete product, is I can get them back quicker. And then, again, when we have our second, we have our third, we have our fourth event, like, that 4 pounds might become 8 pounds. And even on that last heat event last year that we saw mid-September, I think we had that one come through. Those late lactation cows just quit. You're probably not going to get back to where you started. That girl's like, I'm done. I'm tired. Like, dry me off, get me out of here. But it was just when I had it in those herds, I compared to the herds that I didn't have it in, or even other peers or herds that I was calling on, like those, I just got them back quicker. Those dips weren't quite as severe.
I think you made a really important point early on, and that was the ability for the reproduction performance drop to extend quite a while after the milk drop has already recovered. And I think it's not been that long. It might be 10, 15 years, but it still hasn't been that long that people have actually paid attention closely enough to see the effect of a very hot summer affecting breeding. September, October, what you spoke to about the time it takes for an oocyte to develop and mature. And it just because it's comfortable now doesn't mean we're not still seeing negative impact from what we experienced.
Correct. It's 30 to 60 days. And I think most people would agree it's going to be 60 days, like after you finished your last heat event, for everything to fully recover. I mean, if you could run, I don't care where you go, what part of the United States you're in, October is probably your highest percentage of cows bred in a month, because you're getting all those cows that have now finally recovered from the heat stress. By August, September, we're pretty good. Like I said, last year we had that late heat in September that kind of, it threw a little wrench in the toolbox for us. But still, October, November, and it's those slug calvings that always get you. And and that's why it's kind of just like, all right, guys, if we can minimize that, can we take 10, 15, 20% out of that group, and then we can survive, maybe we lose 10 days in milk 6 months from now, and then we capture that return on the investment that we made through the heat. And I mean, I'd even say that in the wintertime, I saw that on a dairy, a very high performing dairy. This year we invested into, like, when it got butt cold, like, okay, we're gonna invest in a quarter pound of fat, and we're gonna almost condense diet similar to what we do in the summertime, and we saw higher production, higher reproduction, and stuff like that. So whether it's heat stress, whether it's cold stress, like, just knowing what you have to do for the cows, for their health, and for your profitability. If you take care of the cows will take care of you.
Yeah. No, like you mentioned, there's a big difference between staying alive and being productive, hitting the mark on repro as well as production. It's my wife grew up in the country, but not on a farm, and she thinks a discussion like we're having, things she's been exposed to with Agri-King, are absolutely mind blowing. She thought only like NASA and the Mayo Clinic paid attention to stuff like this, and not just a herd of cows. And she couldn't be more wrong. And she's a good student. She's picking up fast, but I think there's still a lot people don't grasp.
I think one of the best things I've ever been told, and I'll never forget it, is just think about biological survival in extreme conditions, right? The first thing is, I'm going to survive. I'm going to survive. So when the animal has that mindset, reproduction is the first thing to go. Like, if I can't support myself, I can't support another human being. And then production is going to be the next thing. Like, if whether that's running, working, whatever, I'm just going to do as little as possible to make sure that I can make it through this event. So, like, survival is biologically the number one instinct of any species.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect. Any other closing thoughts you'd like to throw into the mix, Matt, as far as the weather we're dealing with now? What the rest of the summer might look like. Anything you like to close with?
Yeah, so, like, I don't think it's always just products. Like I said, like, when you find a good product, you use it. But it's just making sure that you're making every bite worth its punch. Selenium's FDA regulated at 0.3 parts per million. Um, Supplemental selenium. So, but make sure your vitamin E levels are up. And as you're going to condense those diets, because okay, let's say our high producing group, we have balanced at somewhere probably between 62 and maybe even 68 pounds of dry matter. If you know that those cows are going to drop to 60 to 62, make sure you're keeping that mineral base at the same. Because then intake's coming down, and you want to have those antioxidant coefficients for those enzymes there. Just be mindful of what the cows need. Make sure you're walking those pens, being due diligent to make sure you're avoiding that acidosis or anything like that. Like, I'm a big firm believer in like upping the potassium levels. You probably want to be in that 1.4 to 1.5%. I'm maybe not the biggest believer in the potassium carbonate decad side of things. Like, I get it. I've seen the research. It can be quite expensive to do. Use potassium chloride if that's what you want. Make sure your salt levels are where you want them. Really, all we're trying to do is drive water intake. Not only is water 86% of milk is water, but water is a cooling effect for these animals. Make sure your sprinklers are on. Make sure you maximize fans. This is probably a really unique thing. Like, as producers milk more cows, right? And as pens become as full as they become, I can remember a long time ago that it was, you don't put fans over your feed alley. You put fans down the middle of the barn. You know what? Where are those cows standing when it gets hot? They're standing under the sprinklers in the feed alley. They're just standing there and panting. It does not hurt to put fans over that sprinkler system over the feed alley. Like, those cows will enjoy it. You will see an increased amount of production. Mind your facilities. Make sure that you're increasing that sprinkler rate. Make sure you're optimizing what those fans are. Cow comfort is the number one thing that is not only going to make your cow better, make your life better, and make you more profitable. If you take care of those cows, you will take care of yourself.
That is perfect. I cannot improve on that. I will let you know ahead of time. You can start thinking of a creative excuse, but you will be asked to do this again on another topic. I will guarantee you. That was a great job, Matt. So
well, keep it to cows, and then I'll be okay.
yeah, well, that's agreed. I can make that guarantee. I can make that promise. So, Chris, what did you learn today?
My big takeaway is just the way Matt simplified it for us. The higher the heat, or as heat increases, the less the cows are going to eat. As they eat less, the less they're going to do reproduction, and then production, they go into survival mode. And just love the simplicity of that. Whatever you're listening to us, whatever platform, leave us a review, leave us a like, share it with a friend. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to talk about or any other comments, you can email us at podcasts@agriking.com. Matt, Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.